Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are taking a deep, focused look at the situation unfolding after what many analysts are calling Russia's scramble, following the loss of the Crimea corridor. This moment has become a major turning point in the ongoing conflict, reshaping strategies, forcing new calculations, and exposing vulnerabilities that for months had been tucked beneath the surface of the war. In this video script, we will break down why this corridor mattered so much, what led to its collapse, how Russia is reacting, and what this means for future developments on the battlefield. The Crimea corridor, whether discussed in military reports or geopolitical analysis, has long been considered one of the most important logistical channels for Russia. When Russia first seized Crimea in 2014, the peninsula became a symbolic prize, a military hub, and a strategic anchor for operations across southern Ukraine. To maintain that control, Russia needed reliable supply lines, dependable access routes, and secure pathways for troops, ammunition, fuel, food, and military equipment. As the war intensified, these lines became even more essential. For Russia, the corridor existed in two main parts: the land routes that connected Crimea with occupied territories across southern Ukraine, and the more famous Kerch Bridge, the massive structure linking Crimea directly to Russia across the Kerch Strait. Between these channels, the Kremlin could push resources into the region at scale. Tanks, armored vehicles, weapons systems, fuel convoys, and reinforcement units all depended on these routes. Without them, the ability to sustain operations in Crimea and southern Ukraine would face severe pressure. Over the past months, however, Ukraine has increasingly targeted these routes with precision strikes, drone attacks, sabotage operations, and long-range missiles. Every strike chipped away at Russia's logistics. Every hit made the corridor less stable. Every damaged bridge, rail line, or road weakened the flow of supplies that Russia had taken for granted. The more Ukraine gained access to long-range capabilities, the more vulnerable the corridor became. When reports and footage started emerging showing damaged sections of the Kerch Bridge and destroyed infrastructure along the land routes, analysts quickly recognized the magnitude of the situation. Even before the most severe damage occurred, Russia had been struggling to keep the corridor protected. Anti-air defenses were stretched thin, convoys were rerouted constantly, naval operations in the Black Sea were threatened by persistent Ukrainian attacks. The combination of these pressures made the corridor extremely fragile. Then, when Ukraine delivered major strikes that heavily disrupted or disabled critical sections of the corridor, the effects rippled instantly. In the immediate aftermath, Russia scrambled to stabilize the situation, shifting military supplies to alternate routes, rerouting convoys through more dangerous paths, and attempting to repair damaged sections under difficult conditions. The sudden need to restructure logistics in a war zone put enormous pressure on military planners and commanders. Russia's rush to adapt exposed several weaknesses. One major challenge was the lack of redundant routes. For years, Russia relied heavily on only a few main passages, particularly the Kerch Bridge. While it was built with impressive engineering and meant to symbolize permanent control, it also created a single point of failure. When that point came under repeated attack, the entire system faltered. What was intended to be a symbol of strength turned into a vulnerability that could not be hidden once the strikes increased in intensity. As Russia scrambled to respond, satellite images and eyewitness reports suggested rapid troop movement out of Crimea. Equipment that was once stored deep inside the peninsula was relocated to areas farther from the threat of Ukrainian attacks. Convoys moved at night to avoid detection. Air defenses were shifted and repositioned. Naval vessels moved between ports in an attempt to shield themselves from additional strikes. All of these movements reflected a sense of urgency. For many observers, the speed of Russia's response signaled that the corridor's collapse was more severe than Moscow initially admitted. Statements from officials downplayed the damage, but visible actions told a very different story. When a military power relocates assets, alters long-standing deployment patterns, or rushes to secure alternate supply lines, it is a sign of strategic disruption. The impact of losing reliable access to Crimea goes beyond logistics. It affects morale among troops stationed there. Soldiers rely on steady flows of supplies. When those flows are disrupted, shortages can appear quickly. Equipment breaks down without spare parts. Fuel reserves run low. Artillery units cannot maintain their normal firing rates. Medical evacuation routes become slower and more dangerous. Every small disruption compounds into larger operational problems. Ukraine understands this and has made the pressure on Crimea a core part of its strategy. The aim is not simply to damage infrastructure, but to make Russia's hold on Crimea unsustainable. Cutting the corridor is a way to isolate forces, weaken defenses, and reduce Russia's ability to project power across the region. Each successful strike strengthens Ukraine's position and sends a signal that no supply line is safe as long as the war continues. Russia, for its part, is trying to portray control and stability. Official statements emphasize repairs, claim rapid restoration of traffic, and frame the attacks as temporary inconveniences. However, these statements contrast sharply with on-the-ground realities. Lines of trucks waiting to cross damaged sections stretch for kilometers. Reports from locals describe reduced traffic and heavy security. Satellite images show damaged infrastructure and the slow pace of repairs. As the scramble continues, Russia faces another major challenge, the Black Sea. Its naval fleet based in Crimea has come under increasing attack from Ukrainian drones and missiles. The sinking or disabling of key vessels has forced Russia to reposition its naval assets. With the sea routes also compromised, Russia has fewer options to supply its troops. What was once a secure maritime corridor is now a high-risk zone filled with unpredictability. This deterioration affects Russia's broader military strategy. Crimea was not only a logistical hub, but also a launching point for air and missile operations. Airfields on the peninsula housed aircraft used for strikes across Ukraine. Radar stations monitored large swaths of the region. Command centers coordinated operations along the southern front. As infrastructure comes under attack, these capabilities become harder to sustain. Relocating them weakens Russia's operational reach. International observers are watching Russia's response closely, noting how quickly the country had to react. Some analysts suggest that the collapse of the corridor could mark the beginning of a larger strategic decline. Others believe Russia will attempt major reconstruction efforts or develop new temporary supply chains. However, any new route would be vulnerable as well. Ukraine has shown the ability and willingness to strike deep behind enemy lines. No corridor can be completely secure. In regions under Russian occupation, the effects are already visible. Troops report shortages of ammunition and equipment. Local administrations face challenges transporting goods. Civilians attempting to leave or enter the region find themselves delayed or blocked entirely. The collapse affects not only military operations, but also daily life. As supplies become scarcer, tensions increase, and the population becomes more uncertain about Russia's long-term control. Russia's scramble also reflects broader geopolitical implications. For years, Moscow tried to present Crimea as permanently integrated into the Russian Federation. Massive investments were made. New housing, military bases, and infrastructure were developed. But the collapse of the corridor challenges the image of permanence. If Russia cannot reliably supply the peninsula, questions about its ability to hold it become more pressing. The situation also shifts power dynamics in the Black Sea region. Ukraine's increasing success in targeting Kyiv Alu assets forces Russia into a defensive posture. Other regional actors, including NATO members along the Black Sea coast, monitor these developments with interest. Reduced Russian naval influence changes maritime security, shipping patterns, and the balance of power. As for how Russia might respond moving forward, several scenarios are possible. One option is to intensify its efforts to rebuild and fortify the corridor. This would require massive resources, heavy engineering support, and a concentrated military presence. But even if reconstruction succeeds, the threat of future strikes remains. Ukraine has shown it can hit these targets repeatedly. Another option is to diversify supply routes using temporary ferries, improvised pontoon bridges, and alternate land pathways. These methods, however, are slower and less secure. They are vulnerable to weather, attack, and logistical bottlenecks. While they may offer short-term relief, they cannot replace the strategic value of the original corridor. A third option is a shift in Russia's overall strategy. If the corridor remains compromised, Russia may eventually reduce its military footprint in Crimea or repurpose its assets differently. This would be a significant political move and is less likely in the near term. But the pressures created by the corridor's collapse could push Russia toward difficult decisions. For Ukraine, this moment represents a major opportunity. By maintaining pressure, targeting supply lines, and exploiting Russia's logistical weaknesses, Ukraine can shift the strategic landscape. The more Russia struggles to supply its forces, the harder it becomes for them to advance or hold territory. Momentum is a powerful force in any conflict, and Ukraine aims to use this moment to gain more leverage. As we continue to observe the situation, one thing is clear. The loss of the Crimea corridor has become a defining moment. It marks a dramatic shift from a war of positions to a war of strategic infrastructure. Supply lines, logistical hubs, and transport networks have become as important as tanks or missiles. The side that controls these elements gains a significant advantage. Russia's scramble reflects just how important those lines were. The speed of its response, the emergency relocations, the visible attempts to compensate, and the growing pressure on troops in Crimea all reveal a system under strain. Whether Russia can stabilize the situation remains uncertain. Looking ahead, the collapse of the corridor will continue to influence the conflict for months. It shapes military planning, diplomatic negotiations, and regional power dynamics. Each action taken now will ripple outward, influencing the war's future trajectory. As new strikes occur and new responses unfold, the image of Russia attempting to hold Crimea without reliable access will remain a central narrative. The world is watching, analysts are recalculating, and both sides are adjusting their strategies. This moment illustrates how quickly the balance can shift in modern conflict. A single corridor, once thought secure, can become a strategic liability, and the consequences of its collapse reach far beyond the immediate battlefield, shaping the political and military landscape in profound ways. That wraps up this deep breakdown of the situation surrounding Russia's scramble after the loss of the Crimea corridor. Thank you for watching and staying informed.